So for the last few years, Envision's been using LaunchDarkly as our feature flag service provider, and it's really just completely changed the way that we think about feature deployment. But we've been using it for so long that we've sort of missed out on some of the new features that the LaunchDarkly SDKs have offered. And one of the things that I wanted to look at, which I just happened to come across, is the ability to mark certain user properties as private. So in this case, I'm loading my LaunchDarkly node library here, and I'm instantiating the client and providing my API key, of course. And here I'm giving it this list of private attribute names. And in this case, I'm going to say email. Now, email is what we can consider personally identifiable information, and oftentimes we want to try to avoid allowing that information to leak outside of our application boundaries. Now, the way that LaunchDarkly works is it creates a user database in LaunchDarkly and a rules engine, and then that rules engine gets synchronized to your local system and evaluated against user objects. Now, when we evaluate a feature flag, in this case, I'm evaluating this can see cool feature, I have to provide it some sort of user information to evaluate against the rules engine. In this case, you can see I'm providing my email address, but because the email address has been marked as private in my LD client, that's going to prevent LaunchDarkly from actually sending the email address value outside of my system boundary into their user database. And but even though it's marked as private, and here's the really cool thing, is that we can still evaluate rules against it within the local system. So to see this in action, we're evaluating this feature flag against this user object with the privately marked email address, and then we're going to check this value every 1,000 milliseconds to see if it's true or false. And if we run this application here, you can see right now it's false. But if we jump over into LaunchDarkly, what we can see is that it has identified me as a user, and I'll just refresh to make sure we have the right information. And if I go into this user, you can see that it knows that an email address was provided, but that email address has been marked as private, which means that the LaunchDarkly client did not actually send the email value outside of my application boundary. It didn't send it over to LaunchDarkly. LaunchDarkly has no record of it. But again, here's the exciting thing. We can still develop a rules engine that targets this email address. So if I jump over into my feature flag for can see cool feature, right now targeting is turned off, and because of that, I'm getting false here. But what we can do is create a rule that targets email address. So in this case, I'm saying email ends with @bennadel.com. And I could have done an exact match for Ben at Nadel, but I'm just trying to demonstrate how you can use email addresses more generally, even when LaunchDarkly doesn't know about the specific value. So in this case, I'm going to target anything that ends with @bennadel.com. And what happens is this rules engine, this rules data gets synchronized in the background with my client, and then the client uses the rules engine to evaluate this user object that's being passed in. So even though LaunchDarkly doesn't know about this email address, it knows that there's a rule pertaining to emails. It has that rule locally, and therefore it can evaluate this email address locally against that local rules engine. So if we jump over here, and actually let's move this out of the way a little bit so we can see, let's go back to the terminal, so we can see this happen in real time. So now if I go and I turn targeting on, and this node app is running over here, watch what happens. There you go. It immediately synchronized with my local client, and even though LaunchDarkly itself doesn't know about this email address, the client is able to synchronize with the rules engine and evaluate the email address locally. And if we turn targeting back off, you can see immediately it's synchronized with my client. The rules engine was kept up to date in the background, and again is able to evaluate based on that local rules engine and that local email value. So this is pretty cool, and it's just one of the features that LaunchDarkly has added since the time that we started using it. And I don't know, it's just very exciting from a security standpoint. It's pretty great that they've built that into the platform, and is just one of the new features that I look forward to exploring.